Hello, welcome to our new night story. Now let's relax slowly and move on to our story. It was the summer of 1912. In the endless blue of the Atlantic Ocean, a huge passenger liner, the Majestic Dawn, was sailing from Southampton to America. Amidst the chaos on the upper deck, Lady Eleanor Ashford looked around, holding her elegant hat tightly against the wind. The daughter of a wealthy family, Eleanor had embarked on this voyage hopes of escaping the pressures of her family and the narrowness of society. On one side was Thomas Beckwith, a young and intelligent writer who had found temporary employment in the ship's bookstore. Thomas was a man born in a small town who longed to reach the big city with his dreams and his pen. On the first day of the voyage, as he walked among the wooden shelves of the bookstore, a thin shadow fell across the counter. When he looked up, Lady Eleanor stood before him in her dazzling beauty. Their first glance was an echo of the sadness and wonder in Eleanor's eyes that penetrated into Thomas's soul. In those few seconds of silence, even the song of the sea and the texture of the wind bore witness to this moment. "If you have a book you would recommend, I would be happy to hear it," Eleanor said, her voice soft but distinct. Thomas just smiled. "Of course, my lady. Perhaps the most appropriate book for this journey would be a novel that tells the story of freedom and escape," he said, and held out a copy of Martin Eden by Jack London. Lady Eleanor Ashford took the book Thomas held out to her, and their hands touched. The brief contact struck an unexpected spark in Eleanor's heart. Although she could not understand the feeling, her curiosity gave her the courage to examine Thomas's deep, thoughtful gaze. There was a gleam in his eyes, a spirit driven by the struggles of life and the pursuit of his dreams. As the days passed, their encounters began to increase in the corridors, decks and large dining rooms of the ship. Eleanor's noble family and her rich but cold fiancé, Lord Alastair Havisham, began to notice this situation. Alastair cared more about gaining reputation among the richest passengers of the ship than being by Eleanor's side. While he spent his time at the gambling tables at night, Eleanor met with Thomas under the stars on the quiet and calm deck, talking about her dreams and poems. One night, under the starry skies of the Atlantic Ocean, Eleanor laughed heartily for the first time since she was a child. She burst out laughing at a story Thomas told her until tears welled in her eyes. In that moment, as Thomas listened to the echo of her laughter, he understood the imprisonment in this woman's heart and her longing for true freedom. "Eleanor," Thomas said, his voice slow and deep, "this ship is not only going to America, it is also opening the door to a new life for you. You can break free from all your chains." The momentary hesitation on Eleanor's face bore the trace of the fear in her heart. "And then what, Thomas? When I return to London, I will be locked in a cage again. My mother and father will renew my engagement to Alastair. Even if I go to America with you, I know I have no place in that world." These words stabbed Thomas in the heart like a knife, but he did not want to accept despair. "Maybe this time, you will take the key to that cage with you," he said, and his eyes gave hope to Eleanor's eyes. That night, the calm of the deck was pierced by the sound of a waltz played by musicians below. Thomas, drawn by the music, bowed his head and asked, "Shall we dance, Lady Eleanor?" Eleanor hesitated, but then held out her hand to Thomas and said, "Yes, let us dance." The dance began like a legend, under the moon and stars in the sky. While the two young souls were dancing in front of the silent witness of the seas with the turbulence in their hearts, there was an intimate and simple moment, far from the ostentatious ball going on in the gilded hall of the ship. The wind was waving Eleanor's dress and Thomas' dark hair. Their steps, the screams inside them, told the story of freedom and the excitement of forbidden love. When the waltz ended, Eleanor and Thomas saw in each other's eyes the reflection of the turmoil in their hearts. After this brief, magical moment, the sound of the ship's siren broke through the night. The silhouette of a lighthouse was dimly visible in the distance. The journey was halfway complete, and America was approaching, but Eleanor's thoughts were as turbulent as the sea. Deep down in her heart, her attraction to Thomas and her dream of freedom were at odds with the status and family pressures that had been building for years. The next morning, word arrived that Lord Alistair Havisham was waiting in the main saloon of the ship to speak to Eleanor. The saloon was furnished with ornate red carpeting and adorned with fine crystal chandeliers. Alistair, dressed in a dark grey tuxedo, waited impatiently for Eleanor to arrive. The haughty expression on his face was now tinged with a kind of suspicion. When Eleanor entered, Alistair narrowed his eyes at her. "Eleanor, there's been some behaviour I haven't noticed for some time now. Alistair, I want to take control of my life. This journey has been an opportunity for me to reflect and find myself. My commitment to you was a compulsion from my family, not my heart." Alistair had a hard time containing his anger at this statement. His face was swollen with anger, but he still tried to control his voice. "I would not allow an Ashford to act this way. You are my fiancée, and that reputation cannot be tarnished." After this conversation, Eleanor's escape plan became clearer in her heart. She had to leave the ship with Thomas as soon as possible, and set sail for the world of limitless possibilities that awaited her. When she told Thomas that they should meet at midnight on the back deck of the ship, the young man's eyes lit up. Courage and determination made their hearts beat in the same rhythm. That night, an unexpected storm broke out on the sea. While the ship was rocking with the force of the waves, most of the passengers had retreated to their cabins. Thomas walked up to the deck with the maps he had hidden in the inside pocket of his thin woolen jacket. The moonlight was hidden behind the clouds. Only the flashes of lightning illuminated their surroundings. Eleanor, in her midnight blue dress, also silently left her cabin. There was a cold breath of fear in her heart, but her courage overcame this fear. When they reached their meeting point, the wind was blowing Eleanor's hair and the waves were crashing against the side of the ship. "There is no turning back," Thomas said, taking Eleanor's hands. Eleanor replied, after a moment of hesitation in her eyes, "I want to choose freedom without turning back." But at that very moment, a group of ship's officers and Alistair's men noticed them and approached. It was clear that the escape had been heard. Thomas and Eleanor broke into a run. Their footsteps echoing through the narrow corridors of the ship showed how little distance there was between them and their pursuers. After a while, they reached the lowest level of the ship, an empty space near the huge engine room. Thomas turned to Eleanor, his eyes full of determination. "If we are caught, this is the end of this dream, Eleanor. But if we can escape, we will be free." Eleanor nodded and cupped Thomas's face in her hands. She kissed him boldly for the first time. That kiss was like a vow that quieted the storm and calmed the waves. They then untied a lifeboat tied to the port side of the ship. As Thomas and Eleanor climbed into the lifeboat on the port side of the ship, the rain pouring down on them and the sea's foaming fury reminded them of the danger of their escape. The ship rocked with the sound of metal crushing through them like guts and the howling wind. As Thomas slammed his oars into the water, trying to steer the boat away from the ship, Eleanor glanced back at the flashing lights and chaos on the ship. A complex resolve welled up inside her. For the first time, she held her head high against the dictates of her family and society. As they tossed through the storm, Eleanor and Thomas's trust in each other grew stronger with each stroke of the oar. As the rain ran through Thomas's hair and dripped down his face, the determination in his eyes gave Eleanor courage. "Eleanor, we'll do this," Thomas said, his voice struggling to carry him over the howling wind. After hours of hard fighting, the storm slowly calmed down. The moon slowly showed its face through the clouds, and the sea took on a silvery peace under the light of the stars. The two were silent for a while, as the boat rocked gently in the gentle embrace of the waves. Eleanor held Thomas's hand tightly. "Thomas, whatever happens from now on, I have no regrets," she said. There was only hope and love in her eyes. With the first light of morning, a dark coastline appeared in the distance. It was a sign of the new beginnings that the American continent promised. Thomas took a deep breath and smiled. "Eleanor, this is going to be the best story I've ever written." He was a writer without a pen or paper, but life itself had already begun to write a new story for them both. When they landed in America, the port of New York was crowded and bustling in the early hours of the morning. Immigrants, merchants, sailors, each carrying a different story. As Thomas and Eleanor disappeared into the crowd, they paused for a moment to look at each other. In their eyes was not only freedom, but also the honor and pride of the journey they had begun together. Thomas found a job at a small bookstore, which was the beginning of his dreams, while Eleanor used her rich family skills to work for poor women in the city. Their lives were filled with the collaboration of two souls supporting each other. They were free from the chains of the past, but the price of that freedom brought them a happiness they had never known before. A year later, Thomas published his first novel. It was called Freedom of the Seas, and every word he wrote was a reflection of that stormy night with Eleanor, of escape and courage. The novel was a huge hit, but Thomas' greatest reward was a grateful kiss as he handed Eleanor his first copy of the book. Eleanor and Thomas continued to build their lives together. Every challenge and joy they experienced strengthened their bond. The opportunities and unknowns of the new continent made their love story a story rewritten every day. And so, that night, witnessed by the seas and the sky, was remembered as the beginning of a journey that brought them freedom and love.